You were saying that at that time you didn't think Terence MacSwiney had it in him to go on a hunger strike.
I didn't really mean that he hadn't it in him, but I didn't think he would have taken anything so stupendous on, do you see? But I remember talking to my husband about it out. He had been in Flamgach, which was an internment camp, and later in Reading Jail with Terry. And he always said, I knew always that anything Terence MacSwiney undertook was already finished, that he would never waver. But I'm not denigrating my idea of Terence MacSwiney. I knew he was a great man, always. Well, what else could I tell you now about that immediate period? They lived at this time in Belgrave Place, not very far down the road from me, and it was a sort of meeting place for everybody who came into Cork, who was known in anywhere, who was anxious to know. Journalists, for instance, from all over the world, the whole 5 continents I met them all there. Small people, people interested in suffragette movement, people who were interested in social movements. One of those was the Honourable Albinia What? She's sister of Lord French, anyway. A little bundle of a woman, a lovely little old woman, rode her bicycle all over the hills and everywhere else of the country as a nurse. One of those, what do they call them, kind of nurses? Anyway, she went everywhere. And all these people were there. Mrs. Patsy Lawrence was another one, was a great woman on the women's question. And they all came. Americans came, Spanish, Spain very interested, always, and still is on that part of the thing. German, Italian, everything. They were all there. But Terence, he had a feeling of guilt, he and McCurtain, because the rising did not extend to Cork. And I remember him saying, during his hunger strike, that now his failure, he always spoke of it as his failure, in Cork was vindicated. I think he felt that by his hunger strike he had done something peculiarly great, and upbuilding in the national movement, which of course he had. There's no question about that. But he himself was a lovely man. When you saw him walking along the street, he used to wear a raincoat, always open. I never saw it shut, flying behind him, and he walked so quickly, always hurrying to get. I think he must have felt his life wasn't going to be very long, and that everything he did had to be done presto, in order to get it finished in time. And he, always with his head up, he used to remind me of the prow of a ship, something like that. Extraordinary, full of vitality, full of eagerness. I remember that some of the volunteers didn't appreciate his tactics because they said that he was rushing them too much and treated them a bit as schoolboys. But I think he knew he hadn't long, and I think he knew this job had to be done fast, However, he did it, and did it amazingly well. His tastes were, of course, literary. He wrote a good deal. I don't think very well. I think he had too much to do and hadn't time enough. The best thing he ever wrote was The Principles of Freedom, which is a series of essays. Very good. Very, very good. They were lovely. But when he married first then, which was in 1917, June 1917, he was then interned in a place called Bromyard. It's near the Herefordshire border in England. And it was this very small little country place, lovely little place, greatly wooded. And there was only a tiny little shanty of a church there. It was built by the priest of the place. He was a Belgian, Father Denis Mathieu. And he built it with his own hands and aided by a couple of his parishioners. And they were married in that little church. I was there for a fortnight, staying with Muriel before they were married, and I was her bridesmaid, of course. And then I learned to know Terry as a very lovable person. in that time, almost more so than when he was in Cork, because in Cork he was liable to be called out, and then he always had a bodyguard with him, you know, and you couldn't talk in any way privately, because this big man was there, and you felt the presence of guns and things. But it was a romantic episode too. There were only his two sisters, Dick Mulcahy, who was best man, Father Augustine, who married them, and the little Belgian priest of the place. That was the wedding party. And Muriel looked beautiful. She was a very, very lovely looking girl at that time. Good deal younger than Terry, of course. And he created a great sensation because he wore his coat, his raincoat, going to the church, buttoned, closely buttoned. And then when he got to the church and Muriel arrived, he took the coat off and he was in uniform, you see. And this caused a great splash of astonishment thing, because they never saw him before. And the landlady was very funny. I mean, Muriel's landlady and mine. She suddenly said, "But Mrs. MacSwiney," she said, "your husband is an officer." These round belt things. And our status shot up immensely at that time. The uniform, of course, was smuggled over. Dick Mulcahy's uniform was to have been smuggled over, and most of it was. But there was one piece got lost. I forget which piece, no, the tunic, I think. And he had to wear his ordinary clothes, which was a pity. And then the wedding was in Irish, and the registrar was very flummoxed over this, but he wasn't so flummoxed as not to demand a repeat performance in English so that he could know what they were talking about. So we had the two. We had good value for our money. And then they broke during his internment there, it was a sort of a house internment, it wasn't a close one. He could travel within 5 miles, but he broke through the barrier and went 10 miles to a place called Ledbury, where Thomas McCurtain was, and he wanted to see the boys there. And he and Muriel went off there on their honeymoon. We came back then. I seemed to be always coming back in the big themes of Terry's life. I was coming back with his corpse later on.